Hello, everybody. My name is Kian Turner-Boyle, and today I'll be presenting to you Masahiro Mori's essay on the Uncanny Valley. The man behind the theory. Masahiro Mori was born the 12th of February 1927 and passed away the 12th of January 2025 at the age of 97. He was a robotics and automation researcher who was quite involved in his work, publishing Bukimi no Tani in 1970, the essay that we will be looking at today, as well as The Buddha and the Robot in 1974, an essay that looked at robotics through a more spiritual lens and tried to see how we can view robots as a life that we can properly coexist with. He also founded Robocon competitions in 1988. These were national Japanese robotics competitions that continue to this day and play a key role in expanding interest and involvement in robotics. Finally, he headed Mukta Research Institute, a research institute that focused on Zen Buddhism and robotics, so really furthering his work that he goes into in The Buddha and the Robot. The artificial meat on this robotic bone. Mori is able to properly demonstrate his theory using this function. He plots this function on a graph with an x-axis describing human likeness. This axis only goes from 0 to 100%. Notice how it doesn't go into the negatives. Something cannot be negatively human, it can only look completely non-human. On the other hand, we have the y-axis, our affinity, how much we like or connect to what we are looking at. This can go into the negatives. We can have a feeling of disconnection, unfamiliarity, and maybe even fear towards what we are looking at. Mori is able to put these two axes together and plot his function to demonstrate his theory, stating that as human likeness increases, so too will our affinity towards that thing. However, there's a point where human likeness increases and our affinity towards that thing begins to decrease. This dip between our two peaks of affinity towards what we are looking at is what Mori calls the uncanny valley. Notice how Mori provides two separate lines on this graph, a moving and a still line. The role that movement plays in our perception of what we are looking at is crucial. Mori states that movement scales the function. So our affinity towards something that is moving will increase if our affinity towards that thing was already high. So take, for instance, a cute stuffed animal. If it begins to move or dance, kids will have a much higher affinity towards it. On the flip side, if our if something begins to move, our affinity towards it will decrease if our affinity towards that thing was already low to begin with. Take the corpse. If the corpse begins to move, it is a zombie, and our affinity towards it goes even further down. In addition, Mori highlights that the speed of movement is an important factor. He cites an example from the 1970 World Expo, where a robot with 29 face muscles was able to replicate a human smile. It was able to do this quite well, but when it was programmed to do it more slowly and kind of creep into a smile, witnesses and bystanders stated that it made them feel uneasy and it felt almost uncanny and creepy. Mori is able to apply this theory to prosthetics and apply a solution towards feelings of unease towards prosthetic hands and limbs. Mori thinks, or Mori states, that if we were to seek a non-human design, a robotic design that does not try too hard to emulate human likeness, we will produce a more attractive and a product that we will have a higher affinity towards. So Mori believes that if we produce more robotic, maybe even futuristic designs of prosthetics, instead of pursuing these metallic skeletons covered in synthetic skin, affinity towards those prosthetics will increase. The rift in our affinity. So, how does Mori attempt to explain the uncanny valley? He does this pretty simply. Mori states that when we inspect something that appears human, and upon that closer inspection find that it is in fact non-human, we get an eerie sensation. And that sensation is an uncanny feeling. And due to the proximity of that thing to humanness, the necessity for us to first perceive it as human and then have that perception challenged, the valley is thus pretty close to 100% human likeness, or it appears as we approach human likeness. So Mori is not a psychologist. He is interested in with the aesthetics of this subject. So he leaves the psychological questions up to other people. He questions whether this is a survival instinct, something that is part of evolutionary biology, but he does not make an attempt to truly answer those questions. I would like to attempt to kind of combine the idea of the Heimlich, something being revealed, something familiar being revealed, which is very similar to Mori's explanation of the uncanny, with the idea of cognitive dissonance to really form what I believe is the feeling of the uncanny. So, what I mean by cognitive dissonance is when our original perception, our original belief of something is challenged, we get this moment where our, of course, our original perception, our original belief is being countered by something. And this moment of our original perceptions being challenged causes a moment of dissonance, of discomfort. Typically, when this discomfort is relieved, people feel less stressed and less anxious. But with the uncanny, when the dissonance is relieved and we know for sure that what we are looking at is non-human, we instead begin to feel maybe even more scared and even more confused. How can this thing look so human? How does it work? Is it human? What really is it then? And even when these questions are fully answered, when we finally find out what it is, if it's a robot, we can still be left questioning, why is it so creepy? Why is it so eerie? So, with this, I would like to mention how important our perception is for the uncanny. And our perception is based off of many things. Mori properly asserts that our perception of something is based off of its appearance and also its movement. He stresses the role of appearance when comparing things like, say, an industrial robot that is designed for a specific function, a function being to not be particularly appealing visually, but to instead be efficient in a factory setting. And he compares that to a doll, which is designed to be appealing. We should take also these two masks, the Yase Otoko mask to the right and the Okina mask to the left. These two masks, I would say, one of which is a lot more creepy, being the Yase Otoko mask on the right. What makes the Yase Otoko mask on the right more creepy? Well, I would say, and Mori would agree with me, that the Okina mask on the left looks a lot more familiar, a lot more friendly and um, likable than the mask on the right. We could take the wrinkles on the Okina, that is, again, the mask on the left. We could take the wrinkles on its face. We could take its smile. We could see its closed eyes kind of emulating how eyes look when somebody is smiling. We can see this long kind of facial hair, this goatee or this little beard that he has. Whereas on the other mask, although it does have facial hair, it seems almost drawn on. And we also see this eerily symmetrical face with sharp corners and edges. This is something that is relatively unfamiliar compared to the Yase Otoko mask. So this really highlights the role that appearance plays in our perception of things. All right, so here we can clearly see that the Okina mask, which is the golden mask with the wrinkles that was smiling, has a lot much has sorry, has a much more human likeness, and our affinity for it is a lot higher as well than for the Yase Otoko mask, which has much less human likeness, and our affinity towards it is much lower. Mori also really understood the importance that movement played in our perception, or the role that movement played in our perceptions towards things, creating two distinct lines. A prime example is the movement of a corpse. So, a corpse, our familiar experience with a corpse is that it is still, it is motionless, it is unalive, it is not going to move. But when that original perception, our familiarity with the movement of the corpse is challenged and it begins to move and it begins to have an unfamiliar motion, in this case, any kind of motion whatsoever, it becomes a zombie and it becomes super uncanny. Another good example would be the familiar movement of somebody's eyes when you're talking to them. Um, Normally, when you're talking to somebody, they'll be blinking, they'll be looking at you in the eyes, and they might be uh, looking around as well. But say you were talking to somebody and they were looking at you without blinking and staring at you directly without blinking the entire time you were talking. This unfamiliar movement of eyes that you are completely unaccustomed to, especially interacting with people, would make you feel uncomfortable. Or at least it's assumed that it would make you feel extremely uncomfortable as the movement is unfamiliar. Finally, there is the role that location plays, and this is where the Bunraku dolls are a great example. So I believe that Mori indirectly tackles the role that location plays in our perception of things when he talks about the Bunraku puppets. Mori places the Bunraku puppets quite high on human likeness and gives them quite a high level of affinity. He does this because he says, when we go see these puppets, we go see them in the theater. We go see them somewhere where we'd expect to see them, where they're welcomed. We go see them and we're at a distance at times. This is a location, therefore, that we're very familiar with, that we expect to see them. If this were to change and the familiar of the sorry, if this were to change and the familiarity of the location were lost, the ro the doll would become completely uncanny. If we were to not be at a puppet theater and we're instead at your grandmother's house, looking through one of her decoration closets where she keeps all of her old decorations, and we're to find this doll either hanging in a corner, or crumpled in a corner, or even standing upright, none of that would matter. What would matter is the unfamiliarity of the location and the uncanny feeling that one would have when seeing this puppet in a place that you would not expect it to be. Now, since I'm on the topic of the Bunraku puppets, I would like to quickly kind of mention how they are, in a way, a cyborg. The puppet is the thing that is being brought to life by external means, by these puppeteers. These puppeteers effectively, um, these external aids are able to give these puppets life and allow them to express a story. In this way, I would consider these robots and their relationship with the puppeteers to be that of a cyborg. The robot cannot live without or it cannot even move without the aid of these puppeteers. I think it's also important to mention how perception is incredibly subjective. The familiarity of an appearance, of a movement, of a location is all based on somebody's past experiences with those things. A good example of this would be if somebody were to have spend their entire life around cats and always see these big fluffy calico cats, and then one day they go somewhere and they see Siamese cats, bald cats, walking around all over the place. That would be an uncanny feeling. The appearance would be very unfamiliar. So this is all very subjective in some ways. All right, now I would like to apply this to some material that we've looked at in class, and I'd like to explain why I believe CD3 is more uncanny than Mike. So, beginning with CD3. CD3 is clearly non-human. They are made out of metallic parts, electrical components, but there is enough to allude to them being human. They are given an anthropomorphic body with arms, legs, a torso, a head, and on this head they are given lips that resemble humans. They are sex spot lips, so there is that eeriness from the sex spot lips. Other than these kind of superficial human features, CD3 also has some emotional human features as well. Due to CD3's simulated limbic system and their artificial endocrine processor, they are able to simulate human emotions and really blur our perception of them as non-human. Because of these human emotions, CD3 is able to kind of go through a human's journey in this story, having a first love, going through heartbreak after heartbreak, before before finally finding something or someone that they truly want to seek out and that they do end up seeking out. This is a very human journey that we can perceive immediately as human. In addition to this, CD3 begins the story by saying, Beatrice was my first love. This is something we would immediately attribute or we would immediately recognize as a human emotion. Um, so this allows us to immediately recognize CD3 as a human, but this is then followed by a detailed robotic description of Beatrice through an X-ray vision. This makes the reader aware that CD3 is in fact not human and is something different, is a robot. And this challenges our original perception of CD3, and this perception um, constantly gets played with throughout the story, causing a discomfort, a dissonance between what we are seeing and what actually exists. On taking now Mike, we see that he is also clearly non-human. He is made out of electrical components and electrical and metallic parts, and he is not superficially human at all. He is conically shaped. His brain is placed in his stomach. His form is completely based off of his function. His function being to be a medical robot, whereas CD3's function is to simulate human emotions. So Um, another thing that's important about Mike is similar to CD3, his introduction is sort of ambiguous. When he is first named, he is named alongside other doctors. It is told to Miss Arnfield that Dr. Arnfield will be taken care of by Mike and Tertia. So with this, we cannot distinguish Mike from the other people. I would not consider this, though, to be enough to properly establish our perception of Mike as a person. Not enough is done. Maybe if Mike were to have a conversation with Miss Armfield, a very heartfelt conversation, before it is revealed that he is a robot, there would be more of an uncanny feeling. But that is not there. The perception of the reader is not challenged, and the uncanny feeling, therefore, is not achieved. Mike is programmed. All of his emotions that we see, all of his interactions that we see in the story are the result of programming, are the result of the three directives to make humans happy and keep them safe. Um, and all of this results in his story being a very robotic story that although he is a large component of, ultimately isn't about him. It's about human progress. It's about cancer research, and it's about whether uh, the directives that are given to robots um, are actually accurately followed. So in this way, the reader's perception of Mike is not challenged. There isn't this dissonance that's created, and there isn't this sense of uncanniness that is achieved. One film that I found particularly uncanny and which really exemplified the themes that we're looking at, which we haven't looked at in class, is Jordan Peele's Us. Jordan Peele's Us is a horror film that follows the plot of a group of tethered, a, a clone of every person in the United States is created in this underground lab. Um, and then one day they are sent out to kill their original self and hold hands across America to recreate the Hands Across America movement. So these are um, clearly inspired by the ideas of Freud's double. They are duplications of the original person's ego, and they are manifestations of the person's anti-self. They share a lot of characteristics and similarities, but they're ultimately twisted, and they're ultimately against their original self, seeking to ultimately kill their original self. This isn't a presentation on Freud's Uncanny. This is a presentation on Masahiro Mori's Uncanny. So I would like to look at the aesthetic elements of the tethered and the three components of perception that we've gone over, which make them uncanny. So when looking at the tethered family, we notice immediately that their appearance is off. Their hair is different. They're lacking eyebrows and eyelashes at times. Their eyes are wide and almost emotionless. They're wearing eerie masks, which are dissimilar from the masks that they would originally wear, such as with the kid, for instance. This unfamiliarity of appearance lends to the tethered a very uncanny appearance and creates an uncanny feeling when we look at them. Additionally, their movement is also unfamiliar. Take, for instance, the young girl who is a young athlete, and her tethered self also possesses these traits, but in a inflated manner. She has super speed and stamina, running extremely quickly without getting tired. This unfamiliar movement lends to her a sense of uncanniness when she is running through the woods without breathing heavily and moving very quickly. This unfamiliar movement causes a sense of uncanniness. Finally, the location from which these tethered originate is very uncanny. They are created in this lab with cages filled with rabbits, um, and they are left there to wander and kind of emulate the behavior of their counterparts above ground. A very uncanny location, which also ties them greatly to this course, I would say, in the way that these tethered are robots. They are a robot vision in fiction. They are created in an underground factory. They are programmed with an ultimate goal that they will achieve by any means. They don't seem to have autonomy. They are just given a directive that upon completion they are sent to complete the next directive, which is to simply hold hands across America. Um, a good example of this in the movie is how the tethered version of the young boy is killed because of his adherence to rules to a game that he made up with the boy. This adherence is very robotic and leads to the tethered version of the boy's death. I would also like to quickly mention uh, sorry, I would like to quickly mention Freud's idea of the Heimlich, of something familiar being revealed to be something unfamiliar, to be something secret and hidden. This is a big spoiler for the movie, by the way. The mom, it is revealed, it is revealed at the end of the movie that the mom is actually the tethered version of herself that was swapped out when she was very young, that was dragged into the labs. And the real mother was the tethered mother, was the one with the handcuffs that came. So this was a perfect instance where Jordan Peele made something that felt familiar uh, be revealed to really be something secretly hidden. I would like to wrap up now with a couple of critiques to the Uncanny Valley. The first challenge and critique of the Uncanny Valley is the uncanny feeling one has when looking at exact doppelgangers or an exact clone of oneself. An exact clone of oneself would be 100% human. So according to Mori, we would have a high level of affinity towards them as they are 100% human likeness. This wouldn't be the case though. When we look at somebody that looks exactly like us, if we were to ever come across such a person, we would have a feeling, we would have an uncanny feeling. And this really challenges Masahiro Mori's assertion that a 100% a thing with 100% human likeness will have high affinity and will not fall into the valley as long as there is no um, inhuman part of it that we can perceive, and as long as our perception of it as a human isn't challenged. In addition to this, there is also the challenge of things that look completely non-human having a very high affinity. So take, for instance, Wally, a um, a robot that is uh, clearly non-human, yet our affinity for it would is pretty high, is actually quite high, I would say. Um, so this challenges the idea that affinity can only increase as human likeness goes up. Human or affinity can be very high even if human likeness is at 0. Finally, I think that it would have been interesting if Mori discussed uncanniness with regards to animals and our perception being challenged when we look at animals. Um, it is understandable that Mori did not want to cover this as he is interested in the aesthetics of the uncanny and how it can apply to prosthetics in humans. Um, but the idea of the uncanny with regards to animals is very interesting when you're trying to think about the evolutionary biology and the reason why we really have uh, this feeling when we look at things. Uh, the uncanny within animals is something that is very real and has been discussed in many different cultures. For example, the Navajo, the Hopi, and the Ute tribes all had their own myths about skinwalkers or these evil beings that could morph into humans and animals while possessing kind of eerie um, or can eerily turn into humans and animals. So all of this is uh, these are all kind of examples of the uncanny with relations to animals that Mori doesn't really explore, which is understandable, but it would have been interesting to talk about them. With all that being said, I hope you enjoyed my presentation and I hope you found it entertaining and informational. Thank you.